Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending our session today focusing on local efforts to address climate change. As is often the case for environmental justice communities across the nation, neighborhoods disadvantaged by the legacy of environmental racism are also at the forefront of our fight for climate justice. Today, we will hear about the community engagement and citizen science work taking place in Houston's Fifth Ward neighborhood. Our speakers are Ms. Joetta Stevenson and Dr. Denae King. Ms. Joetta Stevenson is a native of the Fifth Ward community and a graduate of Phyllis Wheatley High School and the University of Houston. Ms. Stevenson is currently the president of the Greater Fifth Ward Super Neighborhood and vice president of the Fifth Ward Civic Club. She is also a Fifth Ward Data to Action block captain, educating residents on lead contamination, referring residents to Houston's Health Department lead abatement program, and assisting in the acquisition of soil and water samples from residential homes for testing of harmful chemicals. Ms. Stevenson pushes for equitable access to public transportation and highway expansion in Houston. She's also been a strong advocate for more affordable housing and equitable disaster recovery, particularly in gentrifying areas and Hurricane Harvey damaged communities. And Ms. Stevenson participated in the development of the Climate Action Plan for the City of Houston. She has authored and co authored letters and insightful commentary to public officials regarding various government projects to shed light on the environmental, climate, and economic impacts on vulnerable communities. We will also be hearing from Dr. Denae King, Associate Director of Community Engagement for the Robert Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at Texas Southern University. Dr. King holds a PhD from the University of Texas Health Science Center School of Public Health in Environmental Science. And for more than a decade, she has dedicated her research and efforts and served communities by tackling health disparities, environmental and climate impacts to underrepresented communities, particularly along the Gulf Coast. She has been involved with planning and development of an environmental data to action project designed to build environmental justice capacity in Houston's disadvantaged communities, and she manages research with the HBCU Gulf, Gulf Coast Equity Consortium, a community university consortium of historically Black colleges and universities and vulnerable communities focused on climate change, urban sustainability, and community resiliency in the Gulf Coast and South Atlantic regions of the United States. So with that, I'd like to begin our presentation with Ms. Stevenson. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Brace. First of all, Fifth Ward, or what we lovingly like to call the Nickel, is a historic community that many African Americans moved into in the late 1800s. And it was definitely a very booming community. It offered a lot of job opportunities. It offered the ability to have housing and actually to begin to start owning houses. We're a community that have at least, even to this very day, at a minimum of 10 churches over 100 years old. I attend one of those churches that was literally founded in 1865. We love to boast and brag on the fact we had some of the greatest Americans come out of this community, such as the late Honorable Barbara Jordan, Mickey Leland, even former heavyweight champion George Foreman walked the streets of Fifth Ward. This is where they were born. They were raised in this community. We're a community that have it was always a working class community, and we had a lot of good businesses that were owned by African Americans. And right now in 2022, we have now sort of gone into a position of being known more, not so much for the wonderful things that have come out of this community or the wonderful people. We are now known for metal recycling companies, cement companies, cement crushing companies, we have a nationally known creosote cancer cluster. We have an unusually high rate of um, uh, childhood cancers. And we have pretty much, I would call us pretty much a petri dish of environmental issues. Next slide.
So in the Fifth Ward community, there are over 4,000 homes that were built before 1978 that may have lead-based paint in them. And so we know that lead exposure from paint, paint chips, your drinking water, and dust can pose some serious health hazards in adults, and particularly for children 0 to 6 years of age. And so Ms. Joetta and a group of other residents are working with the Coalition of Community Organizations to work with the Houston Health Department's lead abatement program, which is funded by HUD to reduce lead-based paint hazards. And you'll see in the flyer at the top of the slide, that's a flyer that's used to really advertise for the program and encourage residential participation. And Ms. Joetta will now share more information about their residential block captain program. Next slide, please.
We were first approached maybe a little over a year ago. And so we've been in training under a nonprofit we call COCO, which is the Coalition of Community Organizations, as well as they have worked in partnership with Texas Southern University, Environmental Defense Fund, and Texas A&M University. And they pretty much sort of looked around and found about 5 of us that lived in the community. And it was determined that the best way to mobilize and get residents on board for having strangers come into their yard to ask, can we take soil samples, is to use people who actually live in the community. People that they know are comfortable with. And what we've done is over this past year and a half is we've been trained extensively, and we're still in training, truthfully. And we have conducted some what I feel some outstanding community engagement outreach efforts in the community. We're a community that we suffer like many other communities across the country, where even our governmental entities aren't that good at outreach, but we are. We are, because we talk to Miss Sadie every day, or check on Mr. Harold. We've walked these streets and knocked on doors. It's myself, like I said, it's 5 of us. Myself, it's Cookie Wickers, Sandra Edwards, it's Carol Smith, it's Derek Jones. We have walked the streets with them, knocked on doors and told them, basically explained what's going on. Because we're usually with a group of people, so we don't want to be intimidating. And we've asked them, can we collect water samples? Can we collect soil samples out of your yard? And we tell them why. We actually engage people so they'll know. And I guess it's a wonderful thing that we have yet to run across anyone that have said, oh, no, don't touch my yard. I don't want you to do anything. No, they want to know. They want to know what's in their soil. They want to know how their families are impacted. Our work goes even beyond collecting the soil samples. We've organized food distributions because, as you know, for the past 2 years, the entire nation has pretty much been in a strange situation, and people are suffering, whether it gets on the news or not. They're in need of food. They're in need of assistance. They're in need of economic help. They're in need of many things, of vaccinations. In the beginning of the COVID tests, we helped in many of those efforts and bringing them into this community. And I am so proud to say that we are at the forefront of helping to educate our residents about the environmental issues that many of them know about, but they really don't know that much about. Next slide. We have Fifth Ward, as along with some other communities in the Houston area, have undergone repeated national disasters. Repeated. As you can see on the slide, in 2015, we had the Memorial Day disaster. There was 6,000 structures, homes, businesses that were flooded out, and people lost their lives. We've had in 2016 the tax day flood, where 9,000, just under 10,000 structures were flooded out. Once again, we lost human beings. We lost people who had families, people who were loved. And in 2017, we had Hurricane Harvey, which was a major rain event. It flooded over 150,000 homes. We lost well over 100 people in this area, and even to this very day, I can say that we are still struggling to get help and assistance, or meaningful help and assistance, from Hurricane Harvey, Memorial Day flood, Tax Day flood. We've even had, since Hurricane Harvey, while we were waiting for federal funding to come into the state of Texas, we even had a tropical storm called Imelda that decided to finish up whatever it thought Harvey didn't do. And it flooded nearly 4,000 structures in the community. And once again, we lost people, we lost human beings. And so these things, these repeated disasters have done nothing but cause a lot of strife in this community, and we've continued to experience that. Over about a year ago, last winter, we're hit with what we call the winter storm Uri. It came completely by surprise. It literally shut down the Texas electrical grid. And I can say that for the first time in my life, I literally thought I was going to freeze to death in my home. We are still suffering from people unable. And what it did is it burst a lot of pipes. It froze pipes. It froze us. It pretty much immobilized immobilized us. So when it comes to flooding, this was sort of, I call it more or less a man-made flood, because the Texas grid, which was controlled basically by the state, should have protected us, but it did not, and it caused a lot of flooding within our homes and a lot of damage. We're still trying to recuperate even from that. Next slide.
So Ms. Joetta has shared with you the devastating impacts of recurring flooding and extreme weather events in the Fifth Ward community. And in this image, we wanted to emphasize to you that over 50% of the Fifth Ward community is located in a floodplain, whether it's a 100-year floodplain or a 500-year floodplain. But the devastating impact of that also is that the great work that the block captains have been doing to really identify homes for the lead abatement program are not necessarily eligible for the program if they are located in a floodplain. So this policy then leads to further disinvestment in the Fifth Ward and surrounding communities. And also the flooding may contribute to, I guess, exacerbating some of the environmental exposures, because what's not seen on this map are images of potential sources of pollution, whether they be current or historical or legacy kinds of exposures. And so we don't have zoning in the city of Houston, and so it's very easy for industrial sources of pollution, so facilities like the metal recyclers that Ms. Joetta spoke of earlier, for those to be located fence line to someone's home. And so what we wanted to point out to you is for you to think about what really happens with soil that might be contaminated from some of these sources of pollution during flooding, and what happens when we think about it for recurring flooding in terms of whether or not that pollution or a plume of pollution might be able to move or be relocated. And so we wanted to kind of point out to you the importance of one, really thinking about homes located in a floodplain and how that might be exacerbated by having legacy and current levels of pollution in the soil. Next slide, please.
The unfortunate impact of climate on lead exposure in our community, number one, the exposure to lead should be at 0 because there is no safe level of lead exposure for children or pregnant women. Point two, there are federal programs to remove lead from homes that are built pre 1978. Because we are a historic community, the City of Houston Public Health Department has estimated we have well over 3,000 homes that were built before 1978. So you can see that we are in a dilemma. Point three, we have homes in the Fifth Ward and our neighboring community, Cashmere Gardens, that have experienced repeated flooding. And as we mentioned, just attacks from natural disasters. Point four, we've also, unfortunately, we have homes that are located in the floodplain. So quite often the process that have been put in place by a FEMA or even once it comes into the state or the county or the city, a lot of times we wind up not being eligible for abatement flooding or eligible for certain types of assistance because of the process that has always been in place and the requirements that that have consistently been put into many programs. And as like Dr. King mentioned, all of this have done nothing more than escalated all of our environmental and our climate justice concerns. Next slide.
So we just wanted to thank some of the sponsors for the work that we were able to share with you today. They include the Environmental Defense Fund, Houston Endowment, the Bezos Fund, AmeriCorps, Environment Texas, the Mitchell Foundation, Chase Foundation, National Institute of Environmental Health Science, and the National Institute of Minority Health Disparities. Thank you.
Thank you both for that incredible talk about what's really happening on the ground as we fight for climate and environmental justice in the Fifth Ward. So I'd like to just maybe begin the discussion by asking Ms. Joetta, how has the block captain's work changed residents' perspectives? I know you've touched on it a little bit, but if you could tell us what you've experienced.
I believe the most important change is that when we knock on those doors and start talking about a subject that no one really approaches our residents to talk about, they feel like somebody is concerned. Somebody cares something about whether or not they are able to live and live in a healthier environment. Number two, they also feel that when we go there, believe it or not, we also touch upon things, general things. We learn a lot because people share a lot of extra information, and we're able to engage people and oftentimes get them a little bit more active or wanting to learn more about what's going on in the community. This is a pretty large community geographically. I would say we're about 3 miles in either direction, 3 miles north, east, west, north, south. And so it's a lot of people that live here, and so that is proven to be working with the block captains and the outreach, and we've able to we not only go and knock on those doors and speak about the environmental issues, like I said, we're able to learn about other things and concerns that people have, and because we live in the community and we are active, we are able to share oftentimes some resources, some information on services that can also help our families.
Wonderful. So I was wondering if you could share, Miss Joetta. We've heard about some of the barriers, like houses in the floodplain being ineligible for other, environmental solutions that might be available to the community. Can you also tell us about your out on the ground experience of barriers that you and the block captains have encountered in educating residents or trying to get the residents enrolled in these remediation programs or access to resources?
Well, one of the things that I think is has really been very, very helpful, we have a large number of Spanish speakers in my community. Now, people who have come from a background of many nations, actually, not just Mexico. We're talking Dominican Republic. We're talking, Cuba. And so when we we have literature in more than one language, and that is a absolute advantage to communicating and making people feel that we are concerned about them as well. They are part of our community. We've also come across or learned because of earlier I mentioned about some of the how the programs are set up to so-called assist the community. We've learned that sometimes one of the reasons people are eliminated in communities like mine is because they might owe taxes on the house that they live in. Well, guess what? That's not an anomaly when it comes to a barely middle class and low income community. But yet, these are usually some of the criteria that they seem to be stuck in the mud in maintaining when they want to say they offer assistance, but they wind up eliminating far too many people. And so we also have to then start looking for other resources or looking for anything to try to help people in order to get on board with and become eligible, and that is time consuming. And as you know, when you're dealing in a community that have a lot of damage to their homes, time is of the essence. That means that you're still in a home that's going to continuously deteriorate. We also have some people, as I mentioned, we present things in more than one language. So we also have people sometimes that are a little bit hesitant, and they're hesitant because they might be undocumented, and they don't know that, and we have to explain, we don't care. You live here, you are us, you are part of us, and we want to help you by any way that we can. So oftentimes legal status does cause people to not reach out or let us know. But when we're knocking on doors, like I said, sometimes we learn things that we didn't know, and oftentimes we're able to help people. Another thing is that we do have a number of renters in the community. Some rent in apartments, some rent houses. We have a lot of, say, small housing units, what we call in the South shotguns, a lot of shotguns. And oftentimes with our block captains, and we're pushing and trying to get people to understand the dangers of lead to their families, we still have to get permission from the landlord in order to do any work in that unit. And sometimes that might be a barrier because, part of the criteria is if we do get permission from the landlord, then we also need that landlord to not just take advantage of that improvement, because they can literally go in and abate all the lead paint, the dangerous lead paint. And so the house basically is under improvement. So we don't want them to just start, kicking people out of their houses. So they have to literally let them stay there for a period of time. That is built into the system. But as you know, sometimes we do run across some landlords that are a little bit, tougher. What is a tough nut shell to crack? Um, we also have sometimes uh, um, people who, when we approach them, and we know that we're looking at peeling paint, we know the signs of that lead contamination. But sometimes we can't just go in, and even if they are eligible to get that abatement, they need other work done. They need, because they're living in a house that have not been maintained. They don't have that extra cash to, say, replace boarding at the bottom of their house, or replace rotten wood. So we always have to figure out ways to maybe get an upgrade of some sort, find resources, find services, find nonprofits, or even some governmental programs, and to try to get them involved in, so that they can get repairs done, so we can come in and abate. You can't abate and just replace the paint on a rotten piece of wood. So that has been a barrier to some of an issue to our program.
Thank you, Ms. Joetta. And I'll
You're welcome.
just end with a question to Dr. King, because I think this is really important about, are there industrial facilities in the flood-prone areas of Fifth Ward, and how does this put residents at risk?
Yeah. So there certainly are industrial facilities that are located very close to homes in the Fifth Ward community. And so these facilities put residents at risk for one, exposure as it relates to air quality. And so we have residents who are very concerned about some of the particulate matter that they might be exposed to, also some of the VOCs that they may be exposed to from some of the creosote sites. And so whether those sites are new or old, there are certainly residents in the community that are concerned about their built environment. And then I think it's important to point out that the block captains do a phenomenal job of working to try to fight, permits for existing facilities, and also permits for companies that are continuing to try and come into the community. And so they collect information about those facilities, try to determine, what's being released, what do those facilities do, what do they make at their sites, and then they educate residents about those facilities so that they can come out maybe to a city council meeting, or even to a TCEQ meeting, where they can express their concerns about having that facility, or even having that facility come into the community. So yes, there are certainly facilities in the community that are not wanted, and also that could do a better job of, being good neighbors. So, making sure residents are safe, making sure that they reduce their emissions, and making sure that residents understand what the health impacts might be from their companies. So yes.
Well, thank you both for today for your time.
Can I add something right quick, Dr. Grace and Dr. King?
Sure.
I just can't let this go by. When you mention sometimes we actually galvanize, but we're able to be galvanized because of entities like Texas Southern and the Environmental Defense Fund that have helped us. We literally last year, we literally fought back against a cement batch plant that was going to open up in the middle of houses and right next to the apartment complex. And we used, with their support, the data they were able to provide the community as a whole, we were able to push back hard enough against that batch plant, and they literally withdrew their permit from the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality. So I just have to brag on that because we were very thankful, and these were grassroots people on that call, fighting and pushing back because they were empowered by the work that you guys helped us do.
Was all your incredible work.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I know that we've got a lot of other questions we weren't able to get to in the chat, but I appreciate your time with our session today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Sarah Jaquette Ray, Professor and Chair of Environmental Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt in Northern California on Wiyot territory. I recently wrote a book called A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet. Welcome to this moment. Welcome to yourself, and welcome to this few minutes of nothingness. It may feel difficult to stop what you're doing for a while. Your momentum is strong, your ideas are popping. You feel a sense of urgency to work together to get important things done. Think of this stillness not as inefficiency, digression, or inaction, but as cultivating the soil from which your best ideas can grow and materialize. Planting a seed in poor soil may yield some results, but they won't be as big and bountiful as possible. The action isn't in just planting the seeds or in growing. It starts underneath, below, before, in the soil. So I invite you to imagine that doing nothing for a few minutes may actually supercharge your ideas, like letting the ground go fallow or amending it during the winter months, so that when it comes time to plant the seed, the conditions are ideal. For the next few minutes, give your ideas the gift of doing nothing. You aren't really doing nothing, just like fallow ground isn't doing nothing. But to help you counteract the surge of productivity pulling you away from cultivating your soil, which makes sitting still pretty hard for most of us, you could repeat in your mind with every exhale the word nothing. Relaxing into your seat, stretch out these few minutes of nothingness. Feel the edges of where your body ends and other surfaces begin. Feel gravity gently pulling you down into the exact, unique, beautiful place you are on this earth. Breathing into your stomach, breathing out, nothing. Over and over. Breathe in, breathe out, nothing. As you return from nothingness, be gentle with yourself. Remember activist Bayo Akamolafe's words. Oh, these times are urgent. Let us slow down. Cultivate the soil of this work you're doing here together by doing nothing too, so you can keep on doing this vital work. to reduce suffering in the world.
We are the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, a coalition of doctors and health professionals mobilizing support for climate solutions that will protect and promote health, equity, and resilience for all Americans.
How this is really a unifying concept for public health, primary care, general medicine, emergency medicine, and disaster medicine.
It's now, it's urgent, and we got to alert everyone at home. We got to alert everyone in the community. We got to alert our politicians.
And if we all contribute just a little bit, it makes a big difference.
Let's connect with the ones you haven't seen in a while, with the ones you admire, to learn together at the 2022 NEHA AEC. Register today at neha.org/AEC.